And welcome to online training module number 2 titled Designing with Capture. Mike did an excellent job on the first training module, which talked about product, and today I'm going to try to focus more on specification. My name is Sherry Morin, and I'm a designer specifier with Trenway, and I will be guiding you through this module. So let's get started. So this module, Understanding Panel Specification, what we hope is in this module we'll cover basic design tools to specify capture, which includes the panning guidelines. We're going to talk about Giza Frame Designer and CAP Panel Builder, which are software tools to apply the tiles to the frames. We'll talk about frame connections and auto hardware, worksheet specifications, and last, some common gotchas or tips to be aware of when specifying capture. Again, the learning objectives, understanding panel specifications. After completing this course, we hope to be able to understand and guidelines for space planning the frames, create Giza and CAP frame designs for capture, understand the connectors, and incorporate panels, connectors, and frames into a worksheet. In summary, you'll be able to specify capture from initial product to placement of product and software, and finally converting the capture drawings to worksheet specifications that will allow you to order the product. This is a great picture, another example of some of the products showing the elevated capture panels, the end panel on the far left, and the standard panels down the spline. Okay, so planning guidelines. An important thing that we need to know when it comes to specifying our frames in order to make everything work and stand up properly. Let's first discuss the panel layout planning. When you are planning the workstations, we need to make sure that we follow some rules for loaded and non-loaded panel runs. In this example, they're showing that a loaded panel run has 2 or more panels connected in a straight line with a panel hung component. And the maximum length we want to make sure we do on a panel loaded run is 8 feet with a maximum of 2 panel connections within that run. Another example is in a non-loaded panel run. You can go longer at 16 feet max, and we want to make sure that you do have the return panels on the sides as shown here. When using the building structural elements, you can use an adjustable wall starter rail that begins with the prefix CAWSR, and it would be used to connect the panel run to a building structural element. These 2 images show some examples of what you can do in a non-loaded and a loaded panel run. And again, another situation using return panels, that's defined as a single panel mounted at a right angle to a panel run or a capture frame end panel attached perpendicular to the panel run. And again, these are more examples. Keep in mind all of this is in your price book if you ever need to reference back to that. One last thing to think about when you're laying panels out and planning is that you want to make sure you use no more than a 16-inch change of height if you have an overhead, and if it's non-loaded you can do a maximum no more of 24 inches in height. In addition to return panels, we offer 2 other types of panel supports. We have a freestanding screen foot, which we'll describe in more detail in the next few slides. And we have frame end panels, which is a structural laminate component attaching perpendicular to the frames, which is shown in the picture on the far right. And then the frame end panel can be used with a freestanding screen foot as a substitute for an end panel. To describe more in detail, the freestanding screen foot transforms the capture panels into freestanding screens. There are some limitations and some rules you need to follow when you use that. Support capture panels can only be up to a maximum height of 50 inches, and you need to be cautious in looking at the image on the far right. You cannot put the panels in a 120-degree application. Obviously the feet will overlap. You cannot use them with the elevated panels that we offer, and if there is any top-mounted overhead storage, or any overhead storage for that matter. And lastly, on the freestanding screen foot, you need to keep in mind that a single panel for a freestanding application must have a support on either side of the frame, so you need to have 2 feet total. So things to keep in mind when using the freestanding screen foot if you have adjustable height tables. The express height adjustable table base can be adjusted, so you can make that base fit between the freestanding screen feet as required, but keep in mind on our standard adjustable tables, not the express tables, the standard ones, it has a fixed base width per catalog number. So if you were using that table, you would need to probably order the base and the top separately so they can be sized to fit in between the feet. And there's a good image right there. Mentioned earlier, the capture frame end panel can be used with the freestanding screen fit as a replacement for return panels. Mike mentioned that quite a bit, and we're pointing that out to you again. When you use this, you can also attach an end panel to the taller frame if you have a taller frame supporting it by using our capture change of height cover, which starts with the prefix of CCH. Some final guidelines for panel support are as follows, and all of these, once again, can be found in your price book. Any end panels, P-legs, or trig do legs, storage, peninsula work surfaces, it's all shown here. No overhead components on the adjacent panels. The same applies for the peninsula work surface in that no overhead component can be on an adjacent panel, and the maximum height has to be 66 inches high. The work surface end panel or some sort of floor support can only be used if the panel attached does not have overhead storage and the maximum height, again, is 66 high. These are some great diagrams. At times it can seem confusing, but keep in mind it's all there in the price book, and we offer support emails and phone numbers on any of this should you have questions. At the end of the training module, we'll point those numbers out for you. Attached here is a description of our various tile heights that we offer on our standard frames. Our frames are fully segmented, and we always start with a standard base tile of 28 inches on the bottom, and then we have 8-inch segmentation all the way up in height. So here's a couple different examples on these elevations. The heights come from 8, 16, 24, and 32. Again, all 8-inch increments. And then we also offer monolithic, which is anywhere from a 36-inch high tile up to 60 inches in height. So, in talking about the frames, as Mike mentioned, at times it can be somewhat confusing, but once you get going and specifying, it really becomes kind of a piece of cake to follow. Our frames are specified in 3 different base style covers. We have the BB, which is blank covers on both sides. We have CB, which is the cutout on one side, blank on another, and CC, which is cut out on both sides. Both of these slides, or all 3 of these slides, depict our standard bases. S designates standard base with no power provided. A quick note on these drawings also to point out is there is a little triangle within the 2D elevations of our frames that you can see on the bottom of this slide. And what that triangle represents is side A's and side B's. The flat part of the triangle represents side A, the point represents side B. That'll be important when you're specifying and laying out your plans so that installers down the road know which elevations are for side A and side B. In this one, we're showing pre-powered panels. P1 designates power in the raceway, and P2 designates pre-powered power in the beltway. As you can see, there is no blank cutouts on both sides for these offerings, because obviously if they're powered, we're going to need some cutouts. So therefore, they're offered with the CB option or the CC option as to the cutouts in the frames. And lastly, we have the PP option, which is pre-powered in the beltway and pre-powered in the raceway. And again, only CC or CB cutouts will be offered. And we also offer H frames. Those are only designated for hardwire bases and used only for Chicago electrical specification. We had this in the previous module, and we're showing it again. Following is a list of our cable capacity. As you can see, we offer all different options, base without electrical, base with electrical. We show you power at beltway and with data. Mid-frame is an opening for data pass-through, which is a little bit above the raceway, and then we show you with power poles in 120-degree conditions. Keep in mind that the capture freestanding foot installed at the base, there's a little notation at the bottom, reduces the cable capacity by 25%. And that's obviously due to the way that the feet are attached to the frame. So, one of my favorite parts, obviously, is getting into the software portion. We discussed the product about frames and tiles, but it's important to know how to apply those tiles in some of our software programs. Let's start discussing with Giza Frame Designer. Frame Designer is a tool in Giza. It's a software program used to incorporate the frames and tiles into specifiable drawings. As you can see in this image, we offer a library setup on the software program very similar to the way it is laid out in the price book. So it's very easy to follow along and find the parts and product and pieces that you need to make your drawings. A helpful tip when pulling up Frame Designer, which is in Giza, is to save the frame design name as something you can identify. So in this example, we are showing what we call 42 SBB, which stands for 42 inch high, standard base, which is the S, BB, which are the blank cutouts. I also show here the G16, which stands for a 16-inch glass stacker that we're going to use, and slat 1 just basically means that there's slat wall on one side. So notice in the Frame Designer you've got a place to put your name that you save. Over to the right is you need to make sure you on the pull down screen that you do put the type of frame that you are going to be using. So in this instance we use the SBB, and at the far right you need to make sure you pull down the height of the actual frame itself. It's also important to know that you want to put as much into your frame designers as you can, because the more info you put into these designer and elevation of tiles, the more it's going to pull over in your drawings, and the more that any auto hardware functions you use will read into the proper top caps, end caps, any connections that are needed. In this instance, there is in Giza Frame Designer, there is a dotted box at the top of the frame design, and inside that it'll pull up stackers, glass stackers, and up-mounted overheads. So it's important to try to apply these into the Frame Designer instead of manually putting them onto your drawings. Also make sure to determine the type of top cap you want. There are situations where you will not be using top caps, such as underneath counter caps, so you could designate no top cap. Most frequently you'll probably use our standard top cap, and if you're using any frameless glass, you would want to make sure and pull down the top cap that talks about using as a channel. Another great tool in the software is to be able to identify if you're using different tile colors or finishes on your frame designs. So here you can put in a code. It's up to, I believe, 4 digits in length, and you can put any type of code. You can use the model number of the actual frame or model code for the frame color or finish itself, or you can put some sort of abbreviation that you feel most comfortable identifying. By putting it in this location on the software, it will pull over into Worksheet, and we'll talk about that later in this module so you can see how to differentiate the different colors. So not only do we talk about Giza's software, but CAP Panel Builder does the same type of function in the AutoCAD software that will allow you to tile and lay out your frame designs and pull those into your drawing. Same sort of setup in CAP. The library is set in the same format as the pricer, so again, it's easy to follow along to be able to find the parts and pieces that you need. As in Giza, you can also do the same thing in CAP and save the names to something that's appropriate, so that way when you're doing your drawings you can quickly identify which frame designs are for which application. And you can also, same thing, apply a code in your elevations to determine what tiles, colors, or finishes that you were using and pull that over into Worksheet, which we'll talk about later. So this slide is just an example of where you can place that finished code. I know we went over this in the first module and Mike did a fantastic job, and again we just want to reiterate it's important to understand manually how our connections and our covers work. There is a auto hardware function which we'll talk about later, but again it's really important to know the basics, and it's always good to double check on any of those auto routines that they are working properly. So here we again, I won't get too lengthy in detail, but discusses all the different types of covers that we offer, be it corner covers 2 ways, 3 ways, stacker frames, and 120s are offered as well. We also offer the change of height posts, so anytime you're in a situation where you're attaching different panels of varying heights, there are important different connectors to make sure that you are aware of and that you use. And the vertical light block is something that we suggest you always put in your specifications, and that's a black vinyl tape. It kind of hides vertical connections and provides visual privacy. There is a calculation we like to use when using these vertical light blocks. It may seem kind of confusing. You can always reference this and write it down or somewhere off to the side that you always have it on hand. And basically it's taking the actual straight connectors themselves, multiplying the quantity of them times the height of those connectors. So in this instance on the far right in red, we're showing that there are 66-inch high straight connectors, and we're saying there were 10 of them, so that equals a total of 660 inches. If you take that 660 inches and you divide it by 12, that'll give you the feet, so it's 55 feet. And if you take that again and divide by 100, it's going to tell us approximately how many rolls of these we need to order. So 0.55 rolls, we would need to round up to 1. So therefore, we would need to order 1 total package of the CPV LBs. Okay, so I mentioned before auto hardware routine. This is a great function in both Giza and CAP that is an expedient way to be able to put all the parts and pieces in once you've laid out your drawing. It's really important that you use the snap and connect features in these software programs so that it will read properly as to all the connections that are needed, which is once again why I said it's really important to understand manually so that you can skim over and just make sure it appears correct in the type of connections you are using. Another important fact is by, again, applying all the important information, stackers, any type of up-mounted overheads, anything like that in your frame designer or CAP panel builder programs, it's going to read all that when you use auto hardware. And again, this is another instance of the auto hardware routine in CAP. The previous image was for Giza. This is the one for CAP, showing you where you can locate how to find that. We have a great feature in Giza that I love that is called Validate, and what that basically does is after you've pretty much drawn up everything in your layout and you've put everything in place, Validate is a great way just to make sure that you had every frame have the proper frame design applied to it. It's very easy to sometimes overlook applying some tile designs, and you want to make sure that you didn't leave any out because obviously, as we all know, once you go to specify, if that's not there, it will not be produced and ordered, and you'll be in a stickler during your installation. Also in CAP Panel Builder, they have one that they call Panel Configuration Check or Check Panel Configuration. It's the same kind of situation in which it's another way to identify anything that may be missing of parts and pieces in your frame layouts. Once you bring your drawings over into the worksheet program, all frames will be linked with the appropriate frame designs. They will come in as highlighted in blue. And basically that grouping means that everything is incorporated into that blue line. So all your tiles are linked together, your top caps, they're all kind of attached into that one frame design. You can flatten this and break that up into all separate line items, and therefore you can consolidate. So if you have a large project, you might want to flatten those and then consolidate all of your tiles that are similar together for ordering purposes. In worksheet, another thing to point out is we want to show where those important columns are that we talked about earlier in Frame Designer and CAP Panel Builder, pulling over some of those. Catalog tag 1 is a family code, or it's a list of all the family codes that we offer for our product. That's important to know if you're using any special SPAs or any discount structures. You will need to know those family codes to make sure you give the proper discounts. Catalog tag 2 is where we have all of our SIN numbers, which is another great column to pull up for any GSA pricing or maybe state contract pricing. Anything that you're using that would need to know those SIN numbers to apply the appropriate discount. And also alias 3, I'm showing, and in this column, you can see it there, I apologize. Alias 3 has the column which depicts for Giza Frame Designer where we put those codes in our frame elevations showing for different finishes. So you can see that it's highlighted there, and I'll show you in a couple slides later how we can break those out and you can finish them off in the proper fabrics or finishes. In the worksheet also for CAP Panel Builder, we need to highlight the finish code column, and that is for CAP Panel Builder where you would find those codes needed for the fabrics that you designated in your CAP Panel Builder. So here is what I was mentioning. If you highlight Group By and you designate that and you ask it to show the codes or columns that we had mentioned before, this will break it out separately so that you can use global options and finish out all of your finishes and have those codes pulled down separately that you can apply the appropriate fabrics or finishes that we did in the Frame Designer and Panel Builder programs. And last, Giza, I'm sorry, this is the same application showing for the finish code column that we used in CAP Panel Builder. So this is the grouping of the finish for the finish code that we had. Sorry, and last on this is the validate option for Worksheet. This is, again, another great tool to use to determine that all items are accounted for and that your finishes are complete when you have it in Worksheet. So lastly, some common gotchas we want to mention. These are just friendly reminders to keep in mind when you're specifying capture. They may not be in bold black and white, so we want to make sure that you are aware of them when you are specifying. Slat wall and laminate tiles cannot be on both sides under a stacker, a top-mounted overhead, or frameless screens. It's due to the way that they connect. 16-inch high tiles need to be used behind our designer shelves. That's due to the bracketry on the bottom of the shelf and the way that it connects to the frame. We want to make sure we get access to that frame, so a 16-inch high tile is needed. As I mentioned before, the light block covers, we recommend that you always put those in your projects. And any change of height posts, when the tallest panel has a glass stacker, you want to use a change of height post. So as we mentioned, we basically have focused on Giza and AutoCAD CAP, but there are many other software programs that use our Trendway product. So we just mentioned them here, and if you need any assistance, you can contact technical support. And lastly, if you have any questions when it comes to specifying, the Design Studio department will be happy to assist you with a phone number there, and also we have our email, design@trendway.com. Don't forget to explore more on our website. Idea starters are a great way to get yourself familiar with how to specify parts and pieces, and you can double check your work in the specs that we offer with those layouts as well. Additional resources for any of the software or training videos or our price books, there are links attached here that you can reference. And lastly, you are now ready to proceed to our part 3, which is Capture Electrical. Thanks for joining us.